This program is underwritten by Sustainable Settings, a nonprofit organization devoted to harvesting nature's intelligence in its research and demonstration of sustainable human settlement. Sustainable Settings is supported by volunteering, the sale of our organic farm products, and your tax-deductible donation. Call 970-963-6107 and visit us on the web at www.sustainablesettings.org. Hi, welcome to GrassRoots. This is Sustainable Solutions. I'm Brook, LeVan. And on this show, we interview practical visionaries. And today, we're very fortunate to have Hugh Lovel here. Hugh Lovel is the author of Quantum Agriculture, and he's a biodynamic farmer and a multidisciplinary scientist, teacher of soil science, and biodynamic practitioner. So he actually isn't just theory, he uses what he does and what he talks about. Hugh is recently in town because over in Hotchkiss we had a gathering, an annual gathering of the biodynamic preparation makers. And Hugh gave a very detailed explanation. I think, let me just say that what Hugh and his work in Quantum Ag and his books have done for me is to illuminate and to describe some of the more esoteric language that came through Rudolf Steiner in 1924 in his agricultural lectures. Hugh's brought it in through the scientific language and helped many, especially in this country, but in other countries as well. He works half the year in Australia and half the year in Georgia, and but he works worldwide. But his work has, and his clarity, has helped many of us understand and better put to use these biodynamic practices. So, Hugh, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, what a great pleasure to have you. And today, in this episode, we're going to have you help us understand how biodynamics works.
Well, I'll be working from a presentation that originally I put together for our advanced course in Twello, Netherlands, which was a couple weeks ago. And then I showed it again at the Biodynamic Preparation Makers Conference in Hotchkiss. And I thought that because some people aren't familiar with biodynamics at all, and some people are sort of familiar with it because it was the method that was introduced by Rudolf Steiner back in 1924. And Steiner didn't call it biodynamics, but the people who picked it up from his lectures, that's what they called it. They needed some name for it. And so bio meant life, and dynamics referred to the life activities or the life processes. And Rudolf Steiner had a very penetrating understanding of how these life processes worked, what they were, and how to work with these life processes so that they all worked in a harmonious way. And when you look at nature, then you can see that very fertile environments have developed in various places on the earth without any human intervention. Nature knew how to get nitrogen out of the air, knew how to get calcium out of the soil, knew how to produce growth and reproductive growth as well. And nature really deserves our best efforts at understanding how these things work.
Well, wait a minute now. Aren't we just smarter than all that, and we can figure out systems and They call it industrial agriculture, I guess, these days. But
Well, better living through chemistry is the slogan that I heard when I was a chemistry student. And and one of my favorite professors was a gardener and used every chemical recommended by, the chemical agriculture culture of that time. And he had a family of 6 kids. I dated his daughter. She's a really, really nice person. Didn't deserve me. Yeah, they gardened. He gardened for his family and everything. And the slogan was better living through chemistry. And so that was my first exposure, really. And I gardened while I was studying chemistry, so I planted potatoes and radishes and lettuce and cucumbers and things like that, and did a little bit of gardening, even though I didn't really know much of anything about it. But I had grown up. Dad had always had a compost pile. The lady across the street and her next door neighbor, they all had compost piles. I thought everyone had compost piles when I was a kid. I didn't realize that it was a rare thing at all. So we were closer to nature maybe than we realized. So a lot of things were just carryovers from the past, and knowing how to make nature work was just part of life. My parents both were born at the turn of the 20th century. My father was born in 1899, and they were old enough to be my grandparents compared to the other parents of kids in my schools. So they went back to a time when 90% of Americans were farmers.
and everything was organic.
Everything was organic because there was no other. There wasn't any chemical or, any kind of artificial agriculture.
So how does biodynamics get into? How do you wake up to that, or where's the epiphany there, the beginning?
Well, I had gotten out of the U.S. Air Force. This was during Vietnam, and I decided that enough of this death. I wanted to learn about life. And I thought biochemistry would be the way to go. I would find out about the chemistry of life. And I was excited about it. The chemistry of thought, the chemistry of emotion, the chemistry of boy meets girl, and we call it chemistry. What's the chemistry of that relationship? And that was an exciting topic. I wanted to know all I could know about it. And so in my innocence, because I'd avoided mathematics and science in high school, and I'd sort of taken the minimum of those courses, and I'd studied business and economics, and I'd studied sociology, and now I thought I was going to tackle biochemistry. And I knew nothing about it. I had to take algebra and trigonometry before I could even take calculus.
That would have sent me down the road right there. Didn't you tell me earlier that you decided you wanted to take soil biology or something like that, and they didn't understand why you wanted to do that?
Well, in my biochemistry curriculum, it was recommended that I take soil microbiology.
Oh.
Because this was where the rubber met the road in terms of biochemistry.
Mm-hmm.
The biochemistry of soil has a lot to do with the life in the soil. That's the soil biology, And to take soil microbiology was recommended in my curriculum.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We had 32 students in this class, and none of them were ag majors.
So where does Steiner and biodynamics enter into?
Well, Steiner was, he grew up, his father was a station agent for the Austrian Railway. And he was stationed out on the very edge of the Austrian Empire at that time. And so as a boy, his father got posted closer and closer to Vienna. And his father was a believer, you might say, in science. Now, science is a belief system.
Oh, yeah.
And so it takes the place in some people's lives of religion. Because what are our belief systems? Well, usually we call these things a religion.
Well, it's based on assumptions, isn't it?
It's based on assumptions. It's also based on observation and data.
And theory.
And yeah, and there's theories, and there's theories in religion, and there's theories in in science.
Well, and then at
you
some
really
point,
get an appreciation of what people truly believe in when they get deathly ill. You know, somebody gets cancer, and what do they really believe in?
so at some point, quantum theory or quantum mechanics and the study of it enters into your learning too, right? Your understanding.
Well, I studied this, of course, in studying biochemistry. So mathematics and physics were all part of my curriculum in biochemistry. And here I was studying biochemistry with the idea that I would find out the chemistry of thought, the chemistry of emotion. You know, what? Do you think there isn't a chemistry of our mental activities? They have to have some kind of a chemical thing going on to exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know? You could take chemicals and you could alter your mental operations. It's like, I thought I was really going to get into that. Now, unfortunately, I got disillusioned. And in my junior year, then I thought what a futile idea it was to think I was going to get that far with biochemistry. We weren't even close to that. When chemical reactions were taking place at the speed of thought, then we'd send a sample through a gas chromatograph, and it took a few minutes, and we broke it apart into all the constituent chemistry that we could detect in the chromatograph, and it took a couple minutes, and we were not finding out the chemistry of living organisms. We were finding out the chemistry of death immediately following life.
This is how a lot of soil tests have been taken for years too, measuring or sintering out, or they use acids or whatever to to just measure the elements, but not the living forces.
Well, just consider in the soil, an earthworm has got a chemistry.
Sure.
And it's got phosphorus working pretty good in it, and calcium, and these different components, sulfur and nitrogen and so forth. If you measured the amount of phosphorus or nitrogen or carbon or whatever was in that earthworm's chemistry, you would have no idea about its influence on the soil and how much it might facilitate the growth of plants. It just because you know how much nitrogen or phosphorus or whatever is in the earthworm doesn't mean you know anything about what its activities are contributing to the life that you're growing in your crops.
So bring Steiner in for us now.
Yeah, well, Steiner, see, was, you might say, a scientist of the invisible.
The unseen.
Because,
right?
yes, because he took the thinking of science into that realm.
Into what? The imaginal?
Into the realm of the invisible.
Okay.
Well, just think about it. There's a lot that goes on in our lives that's invisible. We don't see smells, just for example. We only smell the smells. And then we might associate those smells with where they're coming from and what's going on there.
So we might witness phenomenon, right? But not necessarily. So the organisms are celebrating or not or whatever, and that's how we are able to see what is unseen. Would you say that?
Biophotonic luminescence. And this is where each cell in your body, in my body, in an embryo's body, is giving off and receiving photons in the infrared mainly at the rate of billions per second. So every cell in your organism and mine is in communication with every other cell.
So there's a light there that maybe some people can actually see.
Yeah, so
animals maybe can see it. I mean,
oh yeah, animals. I'm pretty certain that dogs see it, because the dog spectrum, like, is away from the blue and the green and is into the yellow and red, and I'm pretty sure they must see in the infrared.
Mm-hmm.
But if you took a picture infrared of your body, it's glowing.
Okay.
And this biophotonic luminescence is telling each cell where it is in regard to all the other cells in your body. And for that matter, in regard to every other thing outside of you in the universe, which could be the moon and planets and stars and things.
Okay. I don't know if I want to open that can yet, but but what did Steiner give us, so to speak? He opened a door for us, or many. The idea of that the world is alive, number one, but also that we can use our tools, and he gave us some tools to, as stewards, create and or co-create harmony and balance of a kind, since we've actually thrown it out of kilter with chemicals and radiation and a bunch of other things.
We've been a bunch of really juvenile delinquents. We have gone out there and pitched grenades into our functions in society.
Soiled our nest, not in the good way, but
well, in an absolutely inconsiderate way. We haven't had any consideration for what the effects might be. Some of them might be quite good, and some of them might be devastating. And I just saw on a television thing this morning how if you are a person who suffered from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after the use of Roundup, that there's been a court case won and you might be eligible for some sort of compensation for the use of Roundup causing your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, because it has been proven in court that that can occur and has and does occur.
I mean, just for the listeners or viewers, Roundup is one of the most pervasive chemical agents used today. Is that correct?
Well, it's the most profitable agricultural chemical of all time.
Which means it gets used a lot.
Yeah, well, it has made more money for the makers of glyphosate than any other chemical used in agriculture. And that goes back to the introduction of DDT in 1939.
Okay. So, how does biodynamics work?
Well, it has to work on the basis of what we know works in chemistry and physics and mathematics and those scientific, you might say, disciplines. It's working because it's doing those things that work.
Yeah. It does kind of put some people off in coming out of a secular, materialistic, reductionist culture because of the horns and crystals and all that stuff that
it's unseen. You don't see what's working there.
Right. But what he prescribed in 1924 were a set of preparations to help us work with all of the life that we collaborate with. What you've done for me and for many others in the quantum agriculture is to help our secular scientific perspective,
Yep.
which we're burdened with, if you ask me. But it's a good tool. But it's not the be-all and end-all, as we know.
No, and it's so challenging that very few people actually penetrate its mysteries.
Right. But you've helped explain or illuminate what Steiner brought to us. And so how does it work?
I like to talk about these things in ordinary language.
Yeah.
And if I can't say it in a way that I reckon any high school graduate could
grasp.
Yeah, they could get it and feel that they really understood it.
Right.
Then I'll work on it until I get there. That's one of my current ambitions, is to co-author with another biodynamic farmer, Jeff Poppin, in Middle Tennessee, to write a textbook for school children for maybe 8th grade through high school. On how agriculture works.
Yeah, great.
Just agriculture. We're not going to be, as far as I know, we're not going to be any sort of system proponent. Just use whatever works and understand why it works. And I believe that people then will get to the point, oh boy, that that they wouldn't use. I mean, just think about it, how absurd it is to be putting poison on food.
Mm.
Anything that kills the life of the soil, and I grant you there's certain things that are dis-eases in an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why biodynamics works so well, because it has the medicines, the remedies for those out-of-kilter situations. And so these biodynamic preparations are our sort of painter's palette, the options that we have in painting the picture that we want to see come forth from the landscape, come forth from our individual farms. So if we could understand what to do when to shift that energy, even though we see the energy in the results that we see with our senses, and don't see the energetic movement of things in such ranges as the infrared or the ultraviolet or whatever.
Well, I can say that we've been on the ranch here in Carbondale Sustainable Settings for the last 16 years, and gradually did a lot of the physical, horizontal, I call it, permaculture and good sound organic stuff and composting and things like that. But it wasn't until we were really starting to use the biodynamic in addition to that we started to see the life take off. And we now have 5 and soon we'll have 6 years of scientific laboratory soil tests that show that the life and how the life respirates and what's really going on in the soil has grown exponentially in the last 5-6 years. And that's due to the work you've illuminated for us, but also going into the biodynamic preparations and having more of a relationship with the life that we work with and co-create with. And the NRCS, the USDA, is astounded. We were one ranch in 50 that they tested for the last 5 or 6 years that they put us kind of aside, and they just they can't explain it.
But you stood out like dog's balls.
Oh my God, yeah. And so they're wondering, what are you doing? And people, of course, recognize it. The other form of data is the flavor that the people, we can't produce enough, right? Yeah. Our milk, our meat, our eggs, our vegetables, and the chefs know the difference. And so there's other forms of data as well as the lab tests.
Oh, yeah.
And so something's working. And I think what we're going to do here is wrap up this episode. And let's do the next one. But I'd like you to get into how this works.
Yeah, because these biodynamic preparations are like having a medicine chest of magical potions.
We call them land therapies to help people understand them.
Yeah, but they're like magical potions. Now, magic, you got to understand, is simply a science that we don't understand.
Right.
So we're talking about something that works because it works. Mm-hmm. There's a science behind it. Okay. But to understand what that science is has been a real challenge for people practicing biodynamics.
Let's hold
and
everybody
Rudolf
in
Steiner
suspense.
was such a great scientist to have put those threads together.
Yeah.
Of all of the scientists of the 19th century, and there were many great ones, and Steiner stands out as absolutely jaw-dropping, scientific accomplishments.
Right.
It just boggles your mind.
It is. Well, let's close here. Thank you for being with us, Hugh, and we're going to do a couple more episodes. Look for that at GrassRoots. Thank you, GrassRoots, again. And this is Brook LeVan, Sustainable Solutions. This program is underwritten by Sustainable Settings, a nonprofit organization devoted to harvesting nature's intelligence in its research and demonstration of sustainable human settlement. Sustainable Settings is supported by volunteering, the sale of our organic farm products, and your tax-deductible donation. Call 970-963-6107 and visit us on the web at www.sustainablesettings.org.